the 8 is called the leader, the boss, and the challenger. And remember, before we talked about the core fear of the 8 is being controlled, weak, or vulnerable. So the 8 needs to be in control. What we didn't talk about before with the 8 is the tendency toward they often see themselves as very magnanimous and heartfelt, and they don't express themselves as being angry. So what you often get with 8 is that they say they're passionate, you know, but the anger sometimes isn't seen, and so other people may look at the 8 and be like, "Oh my God, you're so angry," and it can be a big blind spot for the 8, and sometimes painful for them to recognize, "Oh my gosh, you know, other people see me as an angry person. That's not what I'm trying to convey." But it will often come up over and over again in their lives in response to how they're reacting to the world, because other people are responding with fear and they can't really sometimes don't understand why. It's like, I'm just expressing my opinion, you know, why are you so afraid? And so you can get that. And so what we'll see with all the 8s is a tendency for the energy to be very big, and they may seem like they're angry when they're just like talking, when they're literally just having a conversation. The anger can come out and they're not necessarily aware of it all the time. Um, Another aspect with the 8, and we'll see this as we're going through, and we're going to go in a minute talk about the different micro expressions and the facial characteristics to look for when looking at 8s, is there is an orientation toward blocking off vulnerability. So anytime vulnerability arises, and this will happen with anyone that has 8 in the tri-type, or sometimes people that have an 8 wing, there's a tendency to sort of close off vulnerability so that it's not felt, because the vulnerability feels like, you know, they're going to melt or something. It's the sort of kryptonite of the Enneagram style. So when vulnerability arises, the 8 has to close it off because it will be too painful. They literally feel like it's going to destroy them. So in a lot of ways, it can be the opposite of 4, who can be more used to the vulnerability. And so we can talk about 8 and 4 being these counterpoints of each other, where they're opposites. It's sort of like the 8 is a 4 turned inside out, and vice versa, where the 4 doesn't realize the extent of their strength and their ability to endure sometimes, depending on the subtype of 4. Whereas the 8 doesn't realize the extent of their vulnerability unless they've done a lot of self-work. So closing off and shutting down the empathy, like we talked about earlier, is a way to protect that very soft core that the 8 has. Okay, so when we're looking for 8s, there's a few things that we can always kind of look for, and these are not hard and fast rules, but they're things that often come up with most 8s. At least 1 or 2 of them you'll see. So downturned mouths in repose, and we'll see this as we go through. Their mouths kind of turn down. And in addition to having the strong nasolabial folds, which are the folds in between the nose and the mouth. So what that expresses is, we talked about the micro expressions last time, it expresses the predominant micro expression of anger. So the downturned mouth is sort of like, you would imagine, we often joke with some 8 friends we have that they can look like gorillas sometimes when they're sitting there, because their mouths turn down, they look angry or grumpy, and it literally is that they're holding the micro expression of anger on their face all the time. Typical archetypes for the 8, warrior is the most common and will look most typical of 8. The king or queen archetype, the priest or priestess, and the priest or priestess 8 it's different because it's not a typical 8 archetype. So when it happens with the 8, they may look like 3s, and we'll see that later. And they often have the challenger defender body type, which is that sort of muscular, there's pictures of this later, but muscular orientation where the muscle is dispersed throughout the body. They look strong. They look very solid. Narrow or predatory eyes, broad shoulders, and a tendency to plant or root themselves into the ground. So sometimes 8s, I know Erin's mother is an 8, and when she sits down, she literally will sit down with force. It's like, you know, forcing themselves into the chair and rooting their feet down. It's not uncommon, and you'll see that with a lot of the gut types, but particularly with 8, it's sort of an unawareness of their own force. So they'll literally like plant things down or slam things down.
Yeah, some mates can even stomp their feet when they're walking without even having the awareness that that they're walking with such force and such authority.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking for an 8 or you're typing an 8, you don't just want to look for the facial structure, you also want to pay attention to the movement in the body as well.
Yeah.
So if you know somebody and there's hard movements and they're slamming and they're walking with force and they don't even realize it, you could be looking at an 8 or somebody that at least has 8 in their archetype or their tri-type.
Right. And sometimes we'll see when we look at some of the video examples, when we look at 8, there can be there's not a lot of movement. So if you're getting a lot of hand movement and fluidity in the movement, you're probably not dealing with an 8. You could be dealing with a 7, with an 8 wing. There's not a lot of movement. They tend to just kind of sit there, and then they stay in the position they're in, or if they move, it's a very deliberate movement.
Yeah. Deliberate is a good word for that.
They may have a snarl or register contempt or anger and repose. So we'll see that as we go through. And we're going to go through all these so we can see it visually. This is just kind of bullet pointing it for you now. And may have deeper lines in between the eyebrows. So they may look like they're frowning, which is different than a 6 frown, which we'll see where the lines go vertical across the forehead. The 8 lines are in between the eyebrow and are, the 6 lines are horizontal. The 8 lines are vertical, so we'll see that too. Okay, so we'll look at some female examples of 8s here. So we have Pink over here on our top left, and sexual, we type her as sexual 847 or 874. Again, just overall looking first, we can just look at the eyes. So you're seeing the more predatory eyes, particularly the women on the top. Most of the women on the top we type as having a 7 wing. So again, you get the pointier features, more of the predatory look in the eyes, whereas on the bottom, we're getting probably more of the 9 wing, except for Monique. She probably has a 7 wing. But Queen Latifah, Rosie O'Donnell, and the Indian saint there at the bottom right-hand corner is Amachi or Ama. So again, you see the difference between the 8 with the 9 wing and the 8 with the 7 wing. Now, going back to the top row up here, with Pink, for example, you see, she's got their predatory eyes. This is Tabitha Coffey, who has a show called Tabitha Takes Over, where she's a hairstylist, and she goes into these salons. I think we have a clip of her. Yeah, we have a clip of Tabitha, which we'll show in a little bit, where she goes into these salons and she kind of takes over and tells them how to fix things, but she's very aggressive, so she's got that kind of bulldozing quality. Roseanne Barr, who most of us are familiar with, very loud. A lot of people see her as obnoxious, but she's got this, she's the typical warrior archetype. You see the jaw here. Pink and Tabitha have the priest. Tabitha has a little queen, but there's that priest quality where you get the pointy features and the long jaw, the warrior here with Roseanne, the squared off jaw. But see, Roseanne has the deeper folds here that we were talking about, the nasolabial folds. Pink's fairly young, so she'll probably get hers. And then Marilyn Horne is an opera singer who Erin and I have gone to see a few times. She does master classes here at the university, and we'll go watch her work with students. And she's very magnanimous and very kind woman, but she's also she feels formidable. She doesn't ever stand up. She sits down the whole time and instructs the students on how to sing. And sometimes she can be pretty aggressive, where she's sort of will push them, and this is in front of an audience, so she's doing this masterclass. She'll push them and push them and push them, but it helps them. I mean, she sees herself as pushing them to greater heights, to reach their potential. So it's very interesting because she's helpful, like a 2, but you can see this, the predatory quality in her eyes, and this is her recently. I didn't pick a younger picture, but it's there nonetheless. Queen Latifah on the bottom is likely 8 with a 9 wing. So again, we have the softer features. She's got the queen archetype, which we talked about last time, so she seems like she'd have a crown on her head. But it's softer. She also has a little bit of server. You can see how far apart her eyes are, which is typical of the server archetype. Monique, she's got more of that predatory quality that we're talking about, where the eyes kind of looks like cat slits and the extreme eyebrows. Rosie O'Donnell is a great example I was talking about earlier of the social 8 that can look softer. I mean, they used to call her the Queen of Nice. And then when she was on The View and she got into a spat with Elizabeth Hasselbeck, who was a 1, um, people saw how aggressive Rosie could be, and when she was on The View, she held that spot at the table like an 8. I mean, she really did control the conversation, and that was her job as the moderator, but it had a different energy, and I think it made some of the other women uncomfortable because, you know, she was controlling a little bit. But you can still see the predatory quality in the eyes and the nasolabial folds here. And then Amma here at the end, she's a very interesting one. And she's very soft. She's Amma the hugging saint. So you go to her, or people go to her, and she gives hugs. She's a humanitarian and has many nonprofit organizations, and she's well known throughout India. But she goes all around the world and she just gives hugs. So she's giving what she calls divine love to people, and she feels very soft. But we've actually been to see her and then watched a movie about her called Darshan, and she's when you hear her talk, you see the 8. I mean, she's grounded. There's a little bit of a gruffy quality. She's self-pres 8. So it's interesting, and it throws people off because she's the server archetype. So you look at her and you might see the softness, but even as she's smiling here, you can see her mouth is turned down a little bit, and the folds again.
Yeah, you can really see it a lot when you watch her too.
Yeah.
I would also point out, if you look at Monique and her body style, and you look at Rosie O'Donnell's body style, they can look similar because they have a similar body style, but whereas like Pink or Tabitha have the smaller limbs, but Monique has a much faster pacing.
Yeah.
So if you listen to her talk, she's a lot faster, and Rosie has a slower pacing.
Right.
So that's where, you know, it doesn't always hold that the nine wingers have like a larger body, but you can really tell when you get down to the pacing.
Yeah.
And Rosie has like a little bit more of a laid back quality, whereas Monique feels a little more bubbly and engaging, and she can kind of hop back and forth to talk about different things. But Rosie's a little more homey feeling.
Right.
And so that's where you can see the wings a lot.
Okay.